One of the things that people assume is that doing a search fund would be a lot easier than doing a startup. You're really kind of using every skill set that you've learned and developed throughout your life. Searching is not something that you decide to do for fun.
I found out how hard it is, how much luck is involved as well, because there are so many so many different ways that a deal can die. It's way more difficult because you're not the original founder. You're jumping on a train that's moving 200 miles per hour. You're not the original operator of that train.
Be a sponge, learn and listen to everyone that you can, regardless of whether it's the most junior person at the company or the most senior person at the company. Everybody has something that they can teach you. There's always something to learn from everyone.
What's the fastest way to assess if a business has strong leadership in place?
Who do you go to when you don't know what to do? If the answer is all one person, then you know that it's a one-man show.
Okay, so first of all, congratulations. Welcome back. It's been a little under a year, I believe, from our first conversation where you had recently launched your search fund, and here you are, successful business owners. And so that's quite an accomplishment. What surprised you about the search process? There's obviously expectations going into it, and now you're on the other side of it. Is there anything that surprised you in that journey?
I think one of the surprises was, from my perspective, I didn't expect there to be so many ups and downs, and I didn't expect it to be so difficult to close a transaction. I knew it was going to be challenging, but I think there's a little bit of a planning bias, right? When you start thinking about a new project, a new venture. And going into it, definitely, I found out how hard it is, how hard the job is, and how much luck is involved as well. Because there are so many so many different ways that a deal can die, and so it just helped me realize how lucky we are that we found the right fit.
Do you have anything to add to that, Zach?
Yeah, I think what surprised me the most was kind of how important underwriting, not just the sort of the traditional business due diligence questions that you might look at, but also really underwriting kind of the culture and trying to get to know the key people. I think I can't I can't emphasize enough how important those things are, because as soon as you close the deal and you move there and that becomes your everyday life, your relationships, with the leaders of the company, with the employees, become incredibly critical. So it doesn't matter how much research you do or how much modeling you do. You really need to make sure that you have a good understanding for what the culture's like, what the people are like, what makes the culture tick, so that you can get ingrained within that.
So search funds are becoming a little bit more, I don't know if I can use the word ubiquitous, but more people are becoming aware of them now. And there's kind of different beliefs as to which model is the best, startup, search funds. For folks listening right now, what would you say is the biggest misconception around buying an existing business rather than starting one from scratch?
I think one of the things that people assume is that doing a search fund would be a lot easier than doing a startup. And the thing is that it's actually, as Rafa was alluding to, extremely difficult to do. So first of all, there's so many different steps to the process that you have to kind of execute and perfect along the way, from setting up a good search engine to find a company, to setting up the right campaigns, doing due diligence on the companies you find, having connections with the sellers, going through the bad versus the good companies and actually selecting the good ones, and then presenting the company to your investors. And, they typically have lots of questions. They're always kind of focused on what's the downside, right? So you have to have a lot of conviction in what you're presenting to them. You need to get through that whole process, raising the capital. And then once you do all of that and you're actually able to close the deal, which there's always things that come up during the course of the deal, then you actually have to go into the operations, where, you're focusing on capital allocation, focusing on the finances, but you're also focused on the strategy and so much more. And so you're really kind of using every skill set that you've learned and developed throughout your life in this process. So yes, there are some ways that you're mitigating your risk as an entrepreneur when you take this journey and path, but there's a lot of areas for you to mess up, or a lot of areas that you have to kind of overcome to be successful.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the team dynamics. So Rafa, you were at Bain. Zach, you were at Goldman Sachs. Both of you met Columbia Business School, MBAs. You sound like the dream team of a search fund co-founder, well, now co-CEOs. Some people, I forget the numbers, maybe you can refresh my memory or tell us about the current data if you know, but many people are reluctant to sign up for a 10-year commitment with a co-founder because they're unsure what is it going to look like when there's a stress event in 3 years or 5 years. And yet you guys kind of have already been through the fire a couple of times. I'm sure it wasn't easy getting through the MBA at Columbia, wasn't easy doing the search. And then here you are, happy CEOs, but a long and hopefully good path ahead of you. But what have you learned about each other in this process? And what would you say about a co-founded search as opposed to a solo search?
Intuitively, right? I think common sense here is correct that a bad partnership is worse than doing it alone. So definitely you need to really think about, I think it's not something you should force. It should come naturally. And if you find somebody who, seems to be a good fit, then I think you have to go through the hard work of asking the tough questions and having the tough conversations up front so that you're sure that you're embarking on this journey, aligned. And it's really rewarding when you find a good fit. I think what we've learned about each other, I think the key learning is, and we continue to learn every day about each other and about how to work together the best way possible, and how to support each other, how to help each other grow, and etc. We're always learning every day. But I think the key realization for me is that we, our thesis originally was really right. That we are very complementary. I think not only from backgrounds, but also styles of working and things that we end up focusing on, and I think that's translating well as well in how we're running the business, how we're splitting our roles.
Yep. And I was going to say the same thing, so I'll go into more detail there. So, yes, very complimentary from just, our professional experience, but also in terms of our working style, as Rafa was mentioning, and how we like to focus and prioritize different work streams. And so, for example, I think from my perspective, I am a lot more focused on, I like to kind of move fast, get through the work as quickly as possible and get to the next thing, and sort of then get to the next thing, and then keep on achieving these goals and keep moving on. That's kind of my personal style of working. Whereas I think Rafa's style is more, he'd rather constantly trying to take a step back, think about what are the goals for the next several years, think about what's the governance look like, think about, how's our relationship look with our board, the owners, the previous owners. That's really complementary, right? Because we always kind of have that push and pull of trying to accomplish as much as possible in as short of a time as we can. But then also kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, and making sure that we're driving towards where we want to be, in several years out. So yeah, not only is it just kind of me having the finance investing side and Rafa having the engineering and operations and strategy background, but it's also about kind of the way that we go about, tackling our work. And I think, both of them are great, and both of them are really effective. So I think, but especially when you combine them together, it works really well.
Zach, I'd like to stick with you for a moment. Many entrepreneurs struggle with accurately valuing their businesses. In your experience in iBanking at Goldman, what's your single most powerful tip for business owners trying to increase their company's valuation?
So as you think about valuation, I think there's a couple of key drivers that will help you, increase your valuation, and to sort of increase the multiple. One is you want to think about the quality of your revenue. I think that's something that investors, because you really want to think about what do investors value? What do they really care about? And if you can provide them with that, they're going to be willing to pay a higher price for your business. So first is, the quality of the revenue, right? So the more that you can demonstrate that your customers are coming back every single year, your customers have some sort of subscription, or you're able to make sure that you get those customers coming back over and over again, the higher the multiple or the valuation is going to be for your business, because that's something that's extremely attractive for any owner. And it kind of gives you stability through difficult times, and it helps you as you think about budgeting and forecasting for the next year, and just planning for the future. It gives you a lot of comfort in your forecast. I think that's extremely important. In addition to that, I think you want to really look to try to get additional scale, right? So scale is another way that you can really enhance the value of your business. So for example, you might be able to do an acquisition, a bolt-on acquisition of a smaller company in a similar industry or a strategic industry that trades at a lower multiple. But then when you combine them together, you have more customers, more diversification, more scale, better buying power, and all of those things. Having greater scale allows you to trade for a higher multiple, and it also allows you to go out to bigger, more sophisticated, more institutional investors that are willing to pay a higher price because it's more competitive. Those are two. And then the third that is always very closely aligned with, with valuation is going to be growth, right? So if you're thinking, it's easier said than done, but if you're thinking about, okay, I want to maximize the value of my business, I'm considering selling, I would say, are there certain things that you can do? Are there certain levers that you can pull that can really enable you to really speed up your growth, for a year, 2, 3 years before you sell? That's going to have a direct correlation to the multiple that you're able to sell your business for. So there's more, institutionalizing the business, professionalizing the business, putting in better systems, making it more sophisticated. All of these things are things that are going to cause you to get a higher multiple. But I named kind of 3 that I think are some of the most important in terms of valuation.
Yeah, all very helpful. Rafa, from your perspective, what's the biggest red flag that makes you walk away from a potential deal?
Off the top of my head, the wrong motivation to sell. I think it needs to be inherently a good fit, and it needs to make sense. They need to be selling for the right reasons. If when you have a situation where the seller really loves the business, has been doing all the right things, but it's just naturally the time for them to retire and focus on other things. It just feels natural, makes sense. In other situations, you're just wondering, well, if the business is so good, you're still young, there's so much growth potential, why are you selling the business then now? Sometimes it's just you can't answer that question, in a compelling way. So I think that would be the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, and along with that, you want to look at, is this seller willing to align with me into the future, right? Are they willing to invest in the equity with me? Are they willing to provide some financing here so that, they're still vested in the future of the deal? When you hear a seller say, I want to get out 100%. I'm not willing to roll anything. I'm not really willing to stay in the deal at all. No earn out. It's at the end of the day, you're never going to know as much as the seller knows about the business, right? And so it's extremely important that, you have a seller that's selling for the right reasons, that's willing to invest going forward, so that you can get comfortable there. So,
yeah, great points. Rafa, talking a little bit about your background in operations, you've transitioned from engineering roles in large corporations like Boeing to startups and entrepreneurship. What's a critical lesson in operational efficiency that entrepreneurs should adopt from big corporate environments?
Being process oriented. So I think, especially in startups and small businesses too, there's an aversion to process because there's like a myth that process is a waste of time. Documenting a process and knowing why we're doing things is it's not necessarily scrappy enough, but I think that's a mistake. Understanding, mapping all the processes and understanding how they are, what they look like today, what they should look like in the future in the optimized state, and everybody in the corporation understanding why they're doing what things the way that they're doing. It just it takes effort to understand that and lay that out, but it's an investment that will allow you to be efficient and really translate your strategy in the day to day.
Zach, once you acquire a company, how do you approach the delicate transition period to ensure existing teams align with your vision and strategy? I believe now you've passed the 100 days post acquisition. Could you talk to us about what that's like?
I think the first step is that you got to take things slowly, right? You don't want to change too fast. People are used to doing certain things for a really long time. So you need to make sure that you go one step at a time. You need to make sure that all of the employees understand that, you have their interest in mind. You want to make sure they're at least the same or better off with the new leadership. The first thing that you need to do is win the trust and create relationships, with all of the employees. And so that's why it was important for us to sit down with every single employee at the company, to get to know them personally, professionally, and understand their goals and their frustrations and see how we can help that. I think after that, which is extremely important, you also need to really develop your relationship with the sellers too, right? I think that's extremely important. They're extremely powerful, right? Their word holds a lot of weight. The employees still continue to listen to them. So very important that the leadership team is really aligned in their goals, in their communication to the company. And so those are the first things that you really need to focus on. And then as you start to think about and then there's so many things that you need to do post close, just from a logistics perspective, from a finance perspective, just to make sure that you're from a legal perspective, just to make sure that you're crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's. You need to take care of all of those things. And then after that, after several months of being at the company, then you can start to kind of think about your vision and start to implement your vision and map that out. And so that's where we are right now in our process. There's certainly certain things that we've done and implemented and improved that we've wanted to do. But now is where we start to think about, okay, this is our goal for the next couple years, the next year, the next 6 months, whatever it is. And then I think you start to first share that. I think clarity is very important, making sure that everyone's working towards a common goal. There's alignment there. And then I think, you start to slowly, focus on the low hanging fruit first. What are the things that I can tackle easily, where I can make a big impact? I think that's how we're thinking about it. Where can we make a big impact without too much disruption? And then from there, over time, slowly, you start to focus on, okay, what are places that are going to be more disruptive, but also high value? And over time, gradually get to that point. So I think the kind of the short answer is that, focus on building relationships, earning the trust of the employees that they can actually take your word, and then move slowly as you try to implement your vision, your strategy.
That's got to be hard to do, to exercise that restraint when you're coming in and you've got, like, you're in the honeymoon phase and people have been there for perhaps years. And there's each can benefit the other, but just like you said, take it slowly and get to understand your environment and build that trust. Sounds very wise words.
Yeah, you want to change everything the first day you get there, right? But that's definitely something you don't want to do.
Rafa, what's your go-to decision-making framework when facing uncertainty?
I think the most important thing when you're trying to make a decision is to understand where you're trying to get. So what's the objective? What am I trying to achieve? And then prioritize what's most important. So it's basically having it all starts with the goal, with the end goal, and then breaking it down into your key criteria, your key drivers, and then you look at different alternatives and rank them against the drivers, against the things that matter to you. Try to be, as in consulting, we like to say, mutually exclusive and comprehensive and collectively exhaustive, right? So you make sure that you look at all of the potential implications of different alternatives, rank them against the things that are important to you, and then discuss and decide.
Yeah, I think that's particularly interesting question right now with everything going on in the economy and the government. Right, we're facing a lot of uncertainty right now in the macro environment, and so for us, what we've really been doing is focusing on a range of outcomes. Right, what if it turns out like X? What if it turns out like Y? What if it turns out like Z? And if it does, we want to make sure that we're prepared. In any scenario, what's that going to look like for our business? What can we do to mitigate the risk? And have a strategy and a plan that's so that we can execute on that regardless of what happens.
I've heard it said that you can change your role, you can change your industry, and you can change your region, but you can't change them all at once. And in some sense you have. Could you talk about how you go about that in a way that kind of increases your probability of success?
Yeah, so it was definitely a big change, right? We moved across the country. We joined a company where we had a really steep learning curve that we still continue to climb, and it's been incredibly rewarding. How have we been able to do that? I think one is be a sponge. Try to learn and listen to everyone that you can, regardless of whether it's the most junior person at the company or the most senior person at the company. Everybody has something that they can teach you. There's always something to learn from everyone. Keeping that mentality. Also, in addition to that, there's no shortcuts for hard work, right? You need to put in the work, put in the hours, be willing to do it, to climb the learning curve and get up to speed on this business. Take the time to do the deep dive sessions on every single part of the company. That's another way we've been able to climb this learning curve. And then maybe most importantly is that we kind of view it almost the opposite in a way, which is that we can basically leverage all the best practices that we have, working at our different companies in different places and bring them, to this special business and make it even greater. So whether that has to do with, financial systems, strategy, communication plans, employee development, we're taking everything that we've learned throughout our careers and we're applying them to this company. So I think a combination of all those has helped us to be really effective so far.
And I would add that one of the factors that helps us achieve that is the fact that we bought a great business and we did the homework, right? We really made sure that we understood the business as well as possible from the outside. And we bought a stable, thriving company that allows us to take the time to learn about it and continue to grow while we do it.
Great answers. I've got a few rapid fire questions for each of you. So Rafa, you first. What's one question every entrepreneur should ask before raising capital?
Why am I doing this? Am I ready? Is this journey emotionally compelling enough for me so that I'll stick through and I'll stick to it in the hard times when it's difficult? Am I really compelled to do this and why?
Zach, most overlooked deal breaker during due diligence?
I think the most overlooked deal breaker is getting to know the employees. I think that's one where it can be challenging. Oftentimes, the owners of the company are not going to want to allow you to get to know the people at their company, but it is critically important. Those are going to be your colleagues. That's going to be your leadership team that you're working with going forward. And if they're weak or there's problems there, everything can start to really crumble. So I highly encourage anyone to do diligence on that.
Advice you got earlier in your career in corporate that you've completely abandoned and why?
We used to be required to wear a tie to work every single day. So we definitely don't believe in that policy. So that's something we've abandoned.
There you go. So Rafa, I guess back to you. What's the fastest way to assess if a business has strong leadership in place?
I think you can ask the employees, who do you go to? Who do you go to when you don't know what to do? And if the answer is all one person, then that it's a one-man show.
5 years from now, what trend in entrepreneurship through acquisition do you predict will dominate? And how should entrepreneurs prepare now?
I think what's going to dominate is you're going to go back to kind of the basic industries that cannot be disrupted by technology. I think those are going to be the industries that searchers are going to be focused on, investors are going to be focused on. So that's really not where we play in this market. You're not looking for super high valuation, high flying tech companies. You're looking for stable, solid businesses that can never be disrupted, where it's really difficult to be disrupted. And so I think it's going to go kind of, and a lot of things will be disrupted by AI and technology, but there are some basics that won't be. And I think, for example, travel, right? You can be supported by technology and AI with itineraries, but people are always going to want to travel. People are always going to appreciate the convenience of having everything booked for them and having a tour director on the trip that's showing them around. Food is another example, right? You're never going to be able to disrupt people eating. So, for example, quick service restaurants, that's something that is always going to be around, in my opinion. So, I think there's going to be a trend towards and a move towards understanding businesses that really cannot be disrupted. And I think that's something that we look for now, but I think that'll be even more and more prevalent.
I think another trend in the ETA ecosystem that's already happening is not really related to the companies, but related to the talent. Is that as it's, and a lot of people are talking about this, but as it's becoming more and more popular and available, you're getting more and more investors who are more eager to pour capital into the ecosystem, and as a consequence, you also have more and more potential entrepreneurs interested in doing this. And again, several not necessarily for the right reasons, or thinking through what it takes to do this. And I think what ends up happening as a consequence, and that's the prediction, right? And I guess we'll see, is that you're going to end up buying worse companies and having worse boards and having and lowering the quality of the outcomes of the ecosystem if it continues to if this really manifests in a larger scale.
And that'll lead to lower returns on average, right, for the ecosystem, and maybe higher multiples potentially, as far as just more capital crowding into this part of the industry causes deals to be more competitive, prices go up, returns go down.
But for the people who are pairing with good investors, doing it for the right reasons, doing the right things, and finding great businesses, I think the distribution is very different. The averages and returns, they look very different for that subset of the ecosystem.
Ultimately, what legacy do you both want to leave behind beyond financial returns?
Yeah, I think for me, it's we want to be able to look back on this in decades or however long it is, and be able to be extremely proud of the team that we've created, the culture that we've created, the employees that we were able to empower and help, the customers we were able to serve. I think those are the things that kind of make this incredibly fulfilling and why we chose this path.
I think the number one thing for me is helping people grow, and both inside of the company and outside, and in the broader ETA ecosystem. So we put a lot of effort into giving back to the ETA community as much as we can. We go speak anywhere we have a chance to, and at the company also. We have a strong leadership team, but we have so many talented people who are working hard and want to grow and have opportunities. And I think we want to look back and see those people, achieving new heights, doing bigger things.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your company now. Zach, I guess I'll start with you. What's one of your favorite things about your company so far?
Favorite things is got to be the people, right? I think we have an amazing team, an amazing group. We have a really long employee tenure on average, which is always a great sign for the culture and the leadership, and that we treat people well and do right by our employees. We have a really talented, smart group of individuals, a really great team that's really passionate about travel and what they do. And that's a lot of fun. We have monthly lunches together. We celebrate everyone's birthday together. We go on trips together, and we have a great time. And people that want to go into travel, they go into it for a reason. They love the industry. We all have that in common with each other. We're all passionate about travel, so there's a really strong connection, and it's a really great group of people.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be the number one thing. I also think it's just the mission is very fulfilling of, allowing people to live their best memories, and in that stage of their lives, right? We're mostly serving, 65-year-olds and older. These are our guests on our tours, and yeah, they're traveling with their groups, with their friends, with their loved ones, and experiencing some memories that are very special for them. So, and seeing new places, expanding their horizons, right? They're getting to see new places, understand a new culture, and understand themselves better too as a consequence. So it's really, travel is really fun and fulfilling because everybody's excited about travel, but I think there's a deeper component to it as well, which is very fulfilling.
Well, kind of touches on Zach's earlier point about people will always travel. I think the most important part of life, or one of them anyway, are the experiences and the people that you share them with. And you're very much positioned in that space. So I think you're well positioned. It is interesting when you think of like management consulting at an elite level and then finance at an elite level coming into this experience space. But why not? Like when I was a tour director, I had people coming from, finance and consulting as well, every industry really, because it's all about storytelling, shared experiences, and growth. So you've touched on all that. I'm curious, like I'm not sure how many years it's been now, but probably a few years. Um, when you find out that like you want to do an MBA, you send out that application, you're not sure yet what the answer is going to be, and you look at yourself now with a classmate owning a business, looking at probably a 10-year at least horizon ahead of you. Does this align, or does this blow your mind at all? Can you talk about that character arc there? Like, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings with where you are now and your intention in setting out on this journey?
I can start by saying, when I went to business school, I did not expect to get into ETA. But I think, it's I only got here and only went through this journey, which is still only in the beginning, because I asked myself, the right questions, and why am I doing what I'm doing, and is there something else that could be more compelling, more exciting, that aligns better with my talent, my aspirations, and ultimately landed at at this. But I think I could not think of anything more exciting that I could be doing with my time and my energy right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, agree. And I think that, yeah, when you go to business school, it's always a possibility. You never know, right? What's going to happen? You don't know if you're going to meet a business partner, or you don't know who you're going to meet, or what's going to happen. There's always a chance. There's a possibility. It's a low chance, but it could happen. It's a pretty neat story that we met, because we were in the same learning team. We were placed into the same learning group, working on our assignments together. So it's probably somewhat intentional by the school, right? They try to place people that are complementary together, and maybe one will stick. But I don't know, of anyone else in our class that became business partners. But it's awesome. It's really exciting. It's really, I'm very grateful for it. It's you could never predict it, right? We could never have known that we would be running this travel tour operator, based in Los Angeles. It's really, really, kind of a magical experience, and so we're grateful to be on this path.
Yeah, it's an inspiring story. And it's cool that I was able to talk to you shortly after you started your search, and that you're one of the successful ones to acquire the very next year. You shared a lot of great insights for business owners as well as for people looking to acquire a business. Is there anything that you want to share that we didn't get to touch on about ETA in general, or your business, or anything at all?
I would just share, with along the lines of what I was saying before to MBA students. I see the majority of our colleagues, in business school. I think taking advantage of your time in business school to relax, party, or travel is great, but it's such a waste of energy if you don't take advantage of that time to actually reflect about what you want to do next, and then do something about that. And so I just challenge everyone who is exploring, who's privileged enough to have this opportunity, right? To really think deeply about what else could you be doing, what other journey could you be pursuing that would be more fulfilling, more exciting, more compelling.
Because ultimately, right, you can't get the time back, and we're spending some of our best years, or some of our most exciting years of our careers, our 30s, on this path, and you only get to do it once. So I definitely agree with the message, to reflect on it, think about what's really going to make you happy, what's exciting, what would your dreams really look like, and talk to as many people as you can if you're interested about that industry, and then go for it.
Great advice. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Congratulations again. Where can people follow you? Where would you like to point them to get in touch or watch what you're doing?
Yeah, you can. We have you can go to our Facebook page, Premier World Discovery. You can go to our website, Premier World Discovery. We also have a direct-to-consumer brand, AFC Vacations. You can look at that. You can sign up. You can get our catalogs. We'll mail them to you in case you want to go on a trip. And aside from that, you can feel free to reach out by email, which I think that David will share, and yeah,
Or LinkedIn.
or LinkedIn, of course.
Sure. Okay. I'll add those. Well, thank you, gentlemen.